Welcome everyone, I am Adeshawa Josh and this is Africa Matters. This week we look at why nearly half of the people on the African continent, or 600 million Africans, do not have access to electricity and what that means for them. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud describes Türkiye as an important partner in his first official visit to Ankara. And there's a sigh of relief in Mali after the West African regional bloc Ecowas lifts economic restrictions imposed on the military regime. More than 30 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are currently facing an acute power outage crisis. The latest International Energy Agency report shows 600 million people don't have any access to electricity. That means they've never been connected to a national grid, or they have to rely on expensive diesel-powered generators. The IEA report also says Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Ethiopia are the top 3 African countries most affected by power cuts. In Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, more than 40% of households generate their own electricity at an estimated $14 billion a year, according to government figures. The IEA says persistent power cuts undermines Africa's overall development and labor productivity across all sectors. So, why is it so difficult to keep the lights on in sub-Saharan Africa? Let's take a look at some of the issues. According to the African Development Bank, poor grid infrastructure and low investment in the power sector are the major source of power cuts in more than 10 African countries, including Nigeria, South Africa, and the DRC. This affects power generation distribution and revenue. As a stopgap measure for unreliable grid connection, tens of millions of Africans have turned to fossil fuel generators. The World Bank estimates that annual spending on diesel and petrol used to power generators is between $30 to $50 billion, which is approximately double the average cost of grid electricity. Many African countries are unable to keep up with the energy needs of their growing population. Sub-Saharan Africa is currently growing at 2.7% a year, and experts say the region's abundant renewable energy resources, like solar and wind, could be a viable alternative to current power output, especially in rural areas where more than 80% of the region's population are off the grid. A report by international NGO Oxfam shows climate crisis and conflict have a significant impact on hydropower resources in sub-Saharan Africa. Erratic rainfall patterns and prolonged droughts reduce hydroelectric output and force extended outages, while conflict destroys grid infrastructure and restricts access to maintenance and repair. Some of these factors have been at play in South Africa recently, which is arguably facing its biggest power crisis in history. At the best of times, the state-run power company, Eskom, can only meet about 87% of the nation's electricity needs. But recent strike action has further exacerbated the problem. Even though the government has met the workers' demands for a wage increase, the power shortfall persists, and the most vulnerable are feeling the brunt of the crisis, as Naledi Moleo reports from Johannesburg.
The darkness and winter cold are about to beset Alexandra in Johannesburg, one of South Africa's most poorest urban areas, and power cuts, also called load shedding, are starting. For Beryl Seller, it is not just the scramble for candles that concerns her.
You know, the minute you hear, or I hear, load shedding, I just go like, oh my goodness, God, please just be with us. That's all I say.
Her 68-year-old mother has severe asthma and relies on an electrical oxygen concentrator.
I have a very, very low a very low lung and can't breathe. Like, I'm always in the oxygen.
When the power goes off, Mary has to quickly be connected to a gas oxygen cylinder. Beryl, who earns less than $266 a month, must set aside $100 of her monthly budget just to service the oxygen concentrator.
I'm the only breadwinner here at home. I look after 9 people and I'm not getting much. So that's one of the things that I have to make sure it gets paid, electricity is paid.
Since 2007, South Africa has buckled under the demand for electricity, with the poor being the hardest hit. Well, this year, power generation has reached a new low with a shortfall of up to 6,000 megawatts each day, according to Eskom. With aging infrastructure, the state power utility Eskom has implemented power cuts for up to 8 hours a day for the last 2 weeks. Many believe the solution is new generation, even though it is not a quick fix.
I think if we do the right thing and bring on new generation capacity, we facilitate it, we encourage it, we incentivize it, the private sector can deliver the short-term solutions and the public sector can deliver the medium and longer-term solutions. And I believe that with the right approach, you can end this in its tracks within 2 years.
South Africa's National Planning Commission agrees that 10,000 megawatts of power generation must come from new generation facilities. The agency is also calling for the declaration of a state of energy emergency.
It is an emergency. And once you've recognized it for what it is, you can put in place certain emergency measures to deal with the emergency that go beyond the ordinary.
While lawmakers plot a way forward, it is families like this one that hope for a speedy solution.
I love with God's grace and love. My breath is God's breath. It's what I pray every morning, every night, before I go to bed, when I get up, for the blessed gift of breath in the morning from God.
Mary and Beryl Seller say that for them, reliable access to energy may mean the difference between life and death. Naledi Muleo, Africa Matters, Johannesburg.
Let's hear more from Agnes Gitau, an Africa expert. She joins me from London. Thank you so much, Agnes, for speaking to Africa Matters. I know you've been traveling a lot across South Africa in the past couple of weeks, and the country is experiencing one of its worst electricity power cuts in history, arguably. What would you say that's like on a daily basis, and how do you think it's impacting the economy?
Thank you, Adisha, for having me. The power shortages and output in the continent is quite dire for businesses, particularly small businesses who have no alternative or cannot afford alternative sources of power, like solar PVs or generators, right? But also day-to-day lives, hospitals are impacted greatly. The economy is losing at least 60 to 100 billion rands per day just because of this. So the impact on the economy, both particularly South Africa, which is a preferred destination for investment, obviously, cost of doing business, cost of energy is key for any businesses wanting to invest in the region. So that has quite an impact. And already, remember, on the common man, this means high prices of goods and services. It means businesses will have to cut out employment. Already high rate of unemployment in South Africa is an issue. So it's really, really hard for South Africa as an economy, but also the impact on the people.
Yeah, this couldn't have come at the worst time for South Africa. But then when you zoom out from South Africa and you look at the entire continent, this is a problem that cuts across a lot of sub-Saharan countries. What would you say are the root causes of Africa's chronic power problems?
Adisha, you and I know we go to the same issues: mismanagement of our resources, lack of planning, governance issues. Eskom, the biggest power producer in South Africa, particularly, has had huge investments, right? It's in debt of over $27 billion, right? We are being forced COP26 to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I don't think we have the capacity to do that, right? So one of the biggest issues that causes constantly for Africa to lack power is, I would say, is mismanagement and lack of leadership.
We know Africa has abundant natural resources that can be tapped to generate power and also provide the raw materials for clean energy. Why aren't African governments doing this? Is the question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there is capacity. South Africa, for example, we're talking about South Africa, given the fact that at the moment they're experiencing six hours of power shortages, right? South Africa has at least 2,500 hours of sunlight per year. This is an incredible opportunity for solar energy, and it can be done. Kenya, the other end in East Africa, 70% of Kenya power is from renewable, the geothermal, wind energy, and a combination of the renewable sector, right? So it can be done, but for the longest addition, businesses, particularly with huge capital, have always invested in the hydrocarbons. The story of renewable is a new, can I say, probably new in the continent, right? But you're absolutely right. We need to start exploring opportunities in the renewable sector, particularly now when the world is transitioning to net zero carbon emissions, right? However, in saying this, it is important to note that even as we tap into the renewable energy, we have incredible resources in natural oil and gas, right? Some of them are being discovered at the moment. We can think about Mozambique, gas deposits. We can think about Tanzania, oil in Uganda, right? So we have to have a mix for us to be able to provide electricity for the 600 million people, for us to be able to produce power for businesses to do business.
But Agnes,
so we need to have
the argument also from some quarters is that renewable energy isn't necessarily cheap on the continent, though we have the raw materials. But to actually make these solar panels, to develop these raw materials, and now we're going back to the basics, like the same resource cost problem that a lot of African countries have. We haven't been able to do it. Why do you think that is? Why is that sector so underfunded?
So I'll say in the last 2 decades or so, I guess businesses who were more focused in the hydrocarbons, right? The oil and gas in Nigeria, oil and gas in Angola, right? So why is it underfunded? It's purely because of finance, lack of patient capital to invest in these sectors. But it can be done, Adisha. We've seen that in Kenya. 70% of Kenya's energy is from renewable sector, right? So it can be done and it's profitable. I think what we've seen with developed economies supporting, like South Africa, I believe South Africa has a pledge of about 8.5 billion to transition from coal to renewable, which is being supported by both the US, France, the UK government, right? Nigeria has also is getting about $1.5 billion from the Beggable West to invest in renewable energy. We need to see a mix of development finance, private capital to invest in the renewable sector. But it's doable, and we've seen that it's actually profitable.
Well, before I let you go, my final question to you is, what's the best way to keep the light on in sub-Saharan Africa? I know you've answered part of how to make it affordable and accessible, but you see, does the responsibility lie solely with the government?
Absolutely. Make it easy for private capital to invest in Africa's energy sector, right? Private sector participation in the energy sector is the way forward. Government alone cannot keep the lights on in the continent. We need to try and come up with incentives to encourage private sector to participate in the energy. We're seeing that already in South Africa. We're seeing that in Nigeria. Kenya is another great example. So finance, and managing these resources well so that we're able to power the continent.
Thank you so much, Agnes Gitau, an Africa expert, for speaking to us on Africa Matters. We have more stories coming up for you here on Africa Matters, including Mali's isolation is over as the West African Economic Bloc, Ecowas, lifts all sanctions on the country's military regime. Mozambique's conservationists aim to preserve white rhinoceros that have been extinct in the country for more than 40 years. We will find out how they intend to do it. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has met with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara during his first official visit since being elected in May. President Erdogan said that Somalia portrays the kind of partnership it has with the African continent in terms of economic development, stability, and humanitarian assistance. Both leaders have vowed to continue the fight against terrorism in Somalia, where the Al-Shabaab group has been launching attacks for more than a decade.
I hereby reiterate our determination as Türkiye to continue contributing to the stability and security of Somalia and its fight against terrorism.
Turkey has been with us for the most difficult periods in terms of humanitarian, in terms of state building, in terms of security and defending, fighting with the terrorists. So it has a special meaning to us for this great country and its people.
We head to Mali next, where relief is at hand for millions of people after months of crippling economic sanctions. West Africa's major political and economic bloc, Ecowas, has agreed to lift financial restrictions on the country after the military junta outlined plans to return Mali to constitutional rule. Melinda Nucifora explains.
The borders have reopened and it's business as usual.
It is a great joy for all of us because our economy has gone down. I think with the borders open, there will be progress for everyone.
Mali has effectively been cut off from its neighbours for 6 months, but now its isolation is over.
It will allow the free movement of our products again, and transport costs will reduce.
The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, imposed strict financial sanctions on Mali in January. The tough move came after the leaders of last year's military coup refused to hold scheduled elections. Mali was excluded from the region's financial markets and central bank, and its economy struggled under severe trade embargoes. The country defaulted on $300 million of debt repayments, sparking fears of a spiralling economic and humanitarian crisis.
If the price of gasoline goes down, it will also reduce our prices. But even though sanctions have been lifted, the price of fuel has not dropped.
ECOWAS removed restrictions on Mali and accepted Burkina Faso's transition timetable after the military leaders of both countries presented a 24-month plan to restore democracy.
However, as it is a process that needs to be monitored and followed, the head of state decided to maintain the individual sanction and also to maintain the suspension of Mali from the organ of ECOWAS.
It's a start, but there's a long road ahead. Melinda Nucifora, Africa Matters.
You're watching Africa Matters, and here's a roundup of other stories making news across the continent. Hundreds of prisoners are still missing in Nigeria after gunmen used explosives to blast the gates of a jail near the capital, Abuja. Authorities say they've recaptured nearly half of them. The Daesh-affiliated group Boko Haram has claimed responsibility for the attack. Last year, more than 1,800 inmates were freed from prison in a similar attack in the southwest of the country. A separate ambush targeted an advance convoy of Nigerian President Mohamud Buhari in the nearby Katsina province. Sudan's main opposition bloc say they will continue their sit-ins to protest against military rule, despite the army saying it will withdraw from talks organized by the UN and African Union and allow civil society representatives to take their place. The Forces for Freedom and Change also rejected a proposal by the country's military leader to make way for a civilian government as a giant ruse. Sudan's military leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, also relieved 5 civilian council members from their duties. Sudan has been pushed to collapse as inflation rises to a record high and political turmoil calls for a return to civilian rule. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo have agreed to diffuse tensions after meeting on Wednesday in Angola's capital, Luanda. Angolan President João Lourenço mediated talks between DRC's President Félix Tshisekedi and his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame. Tensions between the two neighbors have been escalating since late March, when M23 rebels resumed attacks in North Kivu province after nearly a decade without a major offensive. The UN says more than 170,000 people have been displaced. The rebels have reacted by saying the agreement will not stop the fighting in eastern DRC. Welcome back to Sudan now, where millions of people are feeling the impact of a political deadlock and an unprecedented economic crisis as a result of a coup carried out last year. But a female athlete is following her passion and is hoping to be the country's first female wrestler champion at the Paris 2024 Olympics. Sarah Balter has a story.
Patricia Saifuddin Al-Haj is a trailblazer for women's wrestling in Sudan. She grew up watching her grandfather wrestle in Sudan's Nuba Mountains, so decided to follow in his footsteps. Now, the 19-year-old has won a bronze medal in an African championship and has set her goals even higher for the Paris 2024 Olympics.
Some people tell me that wrestling is difficult, and why did you choose this field? It entails violence. I tell them wrestling is not difficult. You may see it as difficult, but it has rules and practices. Even my friends ask me why I choose wrestling. I tell them because I inherited the practice from my grandfather. They tell me it's difficult, but I say it's not difficult at all. It's easy.
For communities in the Nuba Mountains, wrestling plays a significant role in defining their cultural identity. They have a long tradition of practicing it during the harvest seasons, with young men taking center stage.
She chose wrestling. Many people would say that wrestling is for men, not for women. But wrestling is not only for men. Wrestling is an Olympic sport that can be for men, women, and everyone.
But Sudan has been struggling with an ongoing political deadlock. Amid a deepening economic crisis, there is little support offered to ambitious athletes. Fortunately, Al-Haj gets backing from the Sudanese Wrestling Federation.
She has a grant from the Olympic Solidarity to participate in a very long training of 2 years in Nigeria with world champions and the Nigerian champions. And this will help her in the Paris Olympics 2024.
Al-Haj knows it will be a long, hard struggle to make it to the Olympics, but she's ready for the fight. Sarah Balter, Africa Matters.
To Southern Africa next, where conservationists have welcomed 19 very special residents to their new home in Mozambique. They are part of a program to restore wildlife and boost tourism in the country. Natasha Hussein has the details.
A little groggy and a bit disorientated. This is a homecoming more than 4 decades in the making.
We're hoping that translocations like this going forward will maybe save or certainly make a difference in the numbers of rhinos in the world by moving them to different recipient locations in different countries. We're basically hedging our bets.
White rhinoceros have been extinct in Mozambique for over 40 years, largely due to civil war and poaching. Now they're back, thanks to a conservation project to rewild the country's national parks.
Obviously for the benefit of the park itself and the ecosystem there, but also for the benefit of the people of Mozambique.
These are the first of 40 white rhinos to be relocated from South Africa.
So you just come along the fence, you'll see him. He's on the eastern side of the camp.
But catching and moving these huge beasts isn't easy. They're tranquilized, blindfolded and dehorned, loaded into specialized containers, and then trucked 1,600 kilometers to their new home. It's hoped Mozambique will have a thriving white rhino population in about 10 years. Natasha Hussein, Africa Matters.
This week, we stay in Southern Africa and explore Mongu in Western Zambia. Thousands of people flock to the city for the colorful Kwamboka ceremony, when the king of the Lozi people is transported on a decorated barge from his dry season palace to his rainy season residence. Let's take a closer look. That's our show this week. Please share your thoughts and suggestions about the stories you've seen on this episode or ideas you would like us to cover on Twitter using the hashtag Africa Matters. Feel free to reach out to me on my personal handle at @AdeshawaJosh. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube. Just search Africa Matters, TRT World. Like, comment, and share. Thanks a lot for watching. I will see you next week.